When a medevac pilot's thermal camera captured something dragging a missing hiker, federal agents arrived in 2 hours and 13 minutes with pre-printed paperwork. I've tracked these mountains for 50 years, and what I found in that restricted canyon proves they've been managing a secret that costs lives. Jake Hendricks didn't wait for spring thaw. He's a medevac pilot, been flying these mountains for 15 years, and he had a feeling that night. Standard protocol says you wait. The snow's too heavy in February, terrain too dangerous, chances too slim. But Jake launched at dawn anyway, flying a thermal grid pattern over the area where Marcus's truck had been found. His camera picked up 2 heat signatures, 8 miles northeast of the last known location. One was massive, 8 feet tall, maybe more, moving on 2 legs through snow that would have stopped a grown man after 50 yards. The other signature was human-sized, being dragged through the powder with movements that were deliberate, measured, almost careful. The creature stopped every few minutes, adjusted its grip, then continued northeast. Always northeast, toward a canyon system that doesn't appear on any official maps. The movement wasn't frantic or aggressive. It was purposeful, like someone who knew exactly where they were going and had done this before. Jake reported it immediately, called it into the Park Service at 7:02. 2 hours and 13 minutes later, federal vehicles were rolling into the airfield. Not local rangers. Federal agents from the Department of the Interior, already equipped with protocols, already carried paperwork that looked pre-printed. They confiscated Jake's footage, grounded him, shut down the search, citing avalanche risk. The official report came 3 days later. Marcus Webb, presumed lost from hypothermia and exposure. Case closed. But Jake had made a copy before they arrived. He'd pulled the thermal file onto a drive that never touched a network. When he met me at a truck stop outside Sisters 2 weeks later, he slid that drive across the table and said 6 words I'll never forget. They've been doing this for decades. I've been tracking something in these mountains for 40 years, something the government doesn't want acknowledged. And Marcus Webb wasn't the first person to vanish into that unmapped canyon. He was just the first caught on camera. I went home that night and pulled every missing persons file I could access, from Deschutes County going back to 1975. My kitchen table disappeared under 49 years of paperwork. The official explanations were always the same: exposure, falls, animal attacks, standard statistics for rugged countries, nothing unusual. Except when you plot them on a map, the pattern screams at you. 23 cases over 49 years. Every single one. Solo male hikers between 25 and 40 years old. Experienced outdoorsmen who knew these mountains, knew the risks, knew how to survive. These weren't novices. These were men who could handle themselves, and all of them vanished within a 12-mile radius of the same canyon system, the one Jake's thermal footage showed that creature heading toward. I cross-referenced with lunar calendars. 19 of those 23 disappeared during new moon phases. I checked weather patterns. 15 vanished during clear conditions. No storms, no whiteouts, nothing that would explain disorientation. Then I looked at recovery rates. In comparable terrain across the Pacific Northwest, search and rescue recovers about 70% of missing persons. Bodies are found. Gear is located. But in this 12-mile zone, 0% recovery over half a century. No bodies, no equipment, nothing. The statistical probability of that kind of complete disappearance rate is essentially impossible. Even accounting for difficult terrain and wildlife, you'd expect to find something. But there's nothing. It's as if these men walked into that area and ceased to exist. I plotted every disappearance on a topographical map. The points formed a perfect arc around the canyon entrance. Not random, not scattered, but a deliberate perimeter, like they were marking territory. The canyon itself has been closed since 1982, posted with signs reading, "Ecological Restoration Area, no entry." When I'd asked the Forest Service what was being restored, they gave me bureaucratic circles about habitat preservation for threatened species. When I asked which species, they said the information was protected under federal guidelines. That alone told me everything. I've lived in these mountains long enough to know when I'm being lied to. Marcus Webb was taken to that canyon for a reason, and I was going to find out why. Before I could get into that restricted zone, I needed to understand what I was walking into. So I drove to Redmond and started asking questions. Not to officials. To the people who've lived here long enough to remember. Ray Clemens is 80 years old now, spent 40 years logging these mountains. When I mentioned that canyon, his expression changed. He got quiet, looked around to see who might be listening. "We logged everywhere in the 60s, he told me, voice low. Stripped whole mountainsides clean. But that canyon, they wouldn't touch it. Told us it was unstable geology, but that wasn't it." He leaned closer. "We heard things at night when we camped near there. Vocalizations that weren't elk, weren't bear, weren't anything I'd ever heard. Low and deep, like someone trying to talk without the right throat for it. And the men who went into the survey never wanted to go back. Came out pale, wouldn't talk about what they saw." Patricia Voss spent 30 years as a Park Service ranger. When I showed her the thermal footage, that massive bipedal shape dragging Marcus through the snow, her face went white. "In 30 years with the Park Service," she said slowly, "we had standing orders about that canyon. Any search and rescue operation heading in that direction got called off. Always. The official reason was safety concerns, but they never specified what kind. Just that we were to establish a perimeter and wait for federal coordination." "How many times did federal coordination arrive?" I asked. "Never," she said. "We'd set up the perimeter, file the reports, and within 24 hours we'd get orders to suspend the search. Every single time." The third person I talked to was William Kalama, a Warm Springs tribal elder who's been hunting these mountains for 70 years. He didn't seem surprised. "Our people call it Siatka territory," he said. "Guardian of the threshold. We don't hunt there, don't gather there, don't even walk through there. There's an old agreement, passed down through generations. We stay out, and they stay hidden." "They?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "The ones who were here before us. The ones who never left." The government thinks they invented the idea of protecting that canyon, but my grandfather's grandfather knew about it. The boundary's been respected for 200 years. We just never needed signs. 3 independent sources. A logger who remembered the fear. A ranger who followed orders she didn't understand. A tribal elder who knew the truth had been kept for generations. Marcus Webb's family deserved answers. Spring thaw was 6 weeks away. I started packing. If you want to see what I found in that canyon, hit subscribe. Because what happened next made me question everything I thought I knew about these mountains. My cabin sits at 4,200 feet elevation, 23 miles from the nearest paved road. But this was different. This wasn't a weekend camping trip. This was tactical insertion into territory that had been deliberately avoided for generations. I laid out my gear on the workshop floor. Standard equipment wouldn't cut it. I needed to document without being detected, navigate off-trail through February snow, survive a potential encounter, and extract myself if things went wrong. No cell service, no backup, thermal monocular, same model Jake used, Sony Alpha 7S, Mark III for low-light footage, parabolic microphone to hear vocalizations from a distance, satellite beacon for emergencies only, 10 days of freeze-dried meals, scent-sealed, water purification system, 45-70 lever action for defense, climbing gear, rope, harness, carabiners, camouflage tarp shelter to reduce my thermal signature, hand-drawn topographical maps because the official surveys don't show the truth. I plotted Marcus's last known location and traced the thermal footage trajectory. Northeast, always northeast. 3 days to reach the canyon if conditions hold. Before I left, I recorded a video log that if someone was watching this, I wouldn't have come back, that the footage would be on SD cards in a waterproof case. That, Marcus Webb's family, deserved to know. I tried. I uploaded an encrypted backup with a fail-safe switch. If I didn't check in every 72 hours, it would send copies to 3 journalists. Insurance against disappearing like Marcus had. I left at 4 in the morning. The drive took 90 minutes through Forest Service roads that barely qualified as roads. And when I shouldered that 62-pound pack and started walking, I knew I was crossing a line I couldn't cross. The last 12 miles would take 3 days. And that was before I reached the canyon where something had been taking people for 50 years. I crossed into the restricted zone at mile 4, just after dawn. The ecological restoration area, no entry sign, was newer than expected. Metal, still, shining. Replaced within the last year. Someone was maintaining these boundaries. The forest changed immediately. Not gradually, immediately. The bird calls stopped first. Normal morning chorus. Then nothing. Complete silence, except for wind in the pine branches. The temperature dropped. My thermometer read 38 degrees before I crossed the boundary. 50 feet past the sign, it read 30. 8 degrees colder in a matter of steps. That's not weather. I kept my GoPro running, documenting everything. Thermal monocular in my right hand, rifle slung across my back. Every instinct screamed that I was being watched. But thermal showed nothing. At mile 6, I found the first marker. The branch was 11 feet off the ground, thick as my wrist, snapped clean and twisted 180 degrees. Still attached but inverted. The break was fresh. Sap is still tacky. Less than 24 hours old. I've seen bears mark territory. I've seen elk thrash saplings during rut. I've seen every kind of natural tree breakage these mountains produce. This wasn't natural. The force required to snap a branch that thick, that high up, and twist it without tearing it free. Nothing I'd encountered could do that. 50 yards farther, 3 parallel scratches in Douglas fir bark, 9 feet up, each one 18 inches long, carved deep enough to expose white wood. The spacing was too wide for bear claws, too high for anything on 4 legs. Then, the rock stack. 5 stones balanced on progressively smaller bases, arranged in a line pointing northeast, balanced perfectly, impossibly. I stopped and scanned with thermal. Still nothing. But something happened recently. Something that wanted me to know I was on the right path. I tested a theory. Deviated west, 50 yards off trajectory. Within 3 minutes, I heard it. Wood knock. Single sharp crack echoing from the ridge above me. I turned back to the original path. The knocking stopped. They weren't trying to scare me off. They were herding me. And that was more terrifying than any threat display, because it meant intelligence. It meant they'd been tracking me since I crossed that boundary. I'd spent 40 years studying these creatures from a distance. But this was different. They wanted me to find something. By dawn on day 2, I reached the canyon rim. 800 feet of vertical drop, quarter-mile wide, runs northeast for miles into old-growth forest, so thick you can't see the bottom. nothing visible from the rim. But when I switched to thermal, everything changed. Multiple heat signatures beneath the canopy, large, moving slowly, deliberately. I counted 6 distinct sources, too big for deer, wrong movement pattern for elk, bipedal locomotion, exactly what you'd expect from something evolved to move through heavy forest. Then I found the anchor point, worn smooth into the rock, a groove carved from decades of rope friction. Someone had been using this entry point regularly for years. This was a highway. I clipped into my rope and started descending. 60 feet down, the smell hit me. Not decomposition. Musk. Thick, organic, penetrating, like wet fur and pine pitch and earth mixed together. Concentrated enough to taste. The smell predators make when marking territory. The canyon floor was a different world. Game trails everywhere, packed down from heavy use, but no deer tracks, no elk scat, only bipedal prints, pressed deep into ground that should have been frozen. I photographed the clearest impression. 16 inches long, 7 inches wide, 5 distinct toe marks, each with what looked like a claw. Pressure points showed heel strike, then roll through the arch, then push off. Exactly like human gait mechanics, but scaled up for someone who weighed 5, maybe 600 pounds. The tracks came in different sizes, 16-inch prints, 18-inch, even 20-inch prints pressed 4 inches deep, multiple individuals, family groups, and they'd been here recently. I followed the main trail northeast, deeper into the canyon. The walls rose higher, blocking sunlight, creating permanent twilight. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees, and every 50 yards, I saw more evidence of long-term habitation. Lean-to structures built against the cliff face, branches woven together with precision, creating windbreaks and thermal barriers, natural shelters augmented with construction techniques that showed planning, understanding of engineering. Some structures were large enough to house something 8 feet tall. Others were smaller, family units with separate spaces. I counted 4 major shelter complexes in the first quarter mile, each positioned to maximize sun exposure, minimize wind, each with clear sight lines to the others. This wasn't temporary. This was a permanent settlement. This was home. Then I found the cache, cut into the limestone cliff face, 15 feet deep, shielded by a natural overhang, and inside, arranged on rock shelves with ceremonial precision, were items that explained 50 years of missing persons cases, human belongings. I approached slowly, rifle ready, but nothing moved. Backpacks, 12 different brands, 12 different stages of degradation spanning decades. Some fabric is still bright, recent, others weathered, faded, all clean, all undamaged, all stored with care. Water bottles, headlamps, knives, compasses, first aid kits, camp stoves, everything a backpacker would carry, preserved like museum pieces. The equipment wasn't scattered, it was organized, sorted by type. Then the personal items, wallets arranged in a row on the highest shelf. I opened 3 and photographed the driver's licenses. Names I recognized. Jeffrey Morrison, disappeared 1991. David Pacheco, disappeared 2003. And on the newest wallet, Marcus Webb, February 14th, 2024. Wedding rings, photographs of families, kept safe, kept dry, positioned where they could be seen. Like someone was maintaining memories, like someone was honoring those who were gone. I documented everything, matching IDs to disappearance records. 19 confirmed names, 19 men who'd walked into these mountains and never walked out. But there were no bodies, no remains, no signs of struggle or predation. The gear was intact. The personal effects were carefully preserved. Whatever happened to these men, it didn't happen the way the official reports claimed. Then I heard it. Vocalizations, multiple sources, echoing from different points in the canyon. Not random animal calls, coordinated communication, tactical calls. I checked my thermal monocular. Heat signatures were repositioned, closing in from 3 directions. They'd let me find the cache, let me document it. And now, they were moving. I was surrounded. Dusk was falling fast. Down here, between 800-foot walls and old-growth canopy, I had maybe 30 minutes of light. Thermal showed 4 distinct signatures in motion, cutting off my retreat. I took a defensive position against a boulder outcrop, rifle across my knees, camera still recording. If this was how it ended, there'd be evidence. The closest signature stopped 40 yards out. Massive, upright, 8 feet tall, minimum. But visual confirmation was impossible through foliage. Just a dark shape behind pine branches, watching. The second signature approached from a different angle, stopped at 40 yards. Third and fourth took positions forming a perimeter. Perfect tactical spacing, professional ambush positioning, except they weren't ambushing. They were contained. Then the wood knocks started. 3 sharp cracks from northeast, answered by 2 from the southwest, then 1 from above. Communication protocol, coordinating. My finger stayed off the trigger. Every instinct said, don't shoot first. They had an overwhelming force advantage. If they wanted me gone, I'd already be gone. The fact I was still breathing meant they were making choice. I controlled my breathing. 4 counts inhale, hold. 4 counts exhale. My heart rate dropped from panic to manageable. Assess, adapt, survive. The standoff lasted for 90 minutes as darkness became absolute. I switched to night vision, goggles. 4 massive bipedal figures, hair covered, shoulders broader than any human's, arms hanging longer than proportional, eyes reflecting green in the NVG display, eye shine, like a nocturnal predator's tapetum lucidum. They weren't moving, just watching. And I realized this was a test. They'd guided me here. Let me find the cache. Now they were measuring my response. Then the largest one moved. Slow, deliberate, raised its arm and pointed, clear gesture, toward my rope. Then pointed toward the canyon exit. Universal communication. Leave while you still can. I'd been in these mountains for 50 years. I'd tracked elk through blizzards and grizzlies through timber. I'd faced charging bears and survived rock slides. But I'd never felt anything like this. Not fear, recognition, intelligence meeting intelligence, and one side offering mercy. I lowered my rifle, kept my movement slow, started backing toward the rope, maintaining eye contact. It didn't follow, just watched me retreat. I reached the rope, started climbing. 60 feet up, I paused and looked back. They'd moved to the canyon floor, returning to the settlement area, the 4 large figures. But now, emerging from the shelters, were smaller signatures. 3 juveniles, approaching the adults, family reunion behavior. And then I saw the 5th small signature. Different, wrong proportions, moving bipedal but unsteady, guided by the largest adult with careful positioning. I zoomed in my camera, enhancing the night footage. The small figure was wearing clothes, human clothes, mixed with animal hides, but unmistakably human in origin. Narrower shoulders than the juveniles, smaller head, different skeletal structure. A person, a man, walking alongside creatures that shouldn't exist, integrated into their family group without restraint, without fear, living with them, as one of them. I searched for Marcus Webb, recent capture only 2 months ago, but I didn't see anyone matching his build. Just this, one integrated individual who'd clearly been there long enough to adapt. They weren't taking people to end their lives. They were adopting them, bringing them into the family structure, Solitary males with outdoor skills, no close ties, physically capable. Not prey, recruitment. I kept climbing, reached the rim at 2300 hours, pulled up my rope, and I ran through the darkness, because I'd just seen something the government would do anything to keep secret. I made it to my truck by 0400 hours on day 3. I drove straight to a motel in Bend, paid cash, and didn't give my real name. The room smelled like cigarette smoke. I kept the curtains drawn, door chain latched, rifle within reach while I reviewed footage. The evidence was undeniable. Family settlement, human belongings carefully preserved, coordinated tactical behavior, and a human being living integrated into their group. But I needed to understand how long this had been happening and whether the federal government knew. The Ecological Restoration Area designation was established in 1982, executive order signed by Interior Secretary James Watt. Justification listed as critical habitat preservation for threatened species, but the species was never named, never classified. I cross-referenced with Jake's footage confiscation, Department of the Interior wildlife officials, same agency that created the protected zone, same agency managing it for 42 years. Then I found Patricia's park service orders. Every directive to abort search operations originated from DOI regional headquarters, federal oversight from the top down, and the logging company Ray worked for received a DOI exemption for that specific canyon in 1963, 20 years before the official protection zone was established. The pattern was clear. Active federal protection since at least 1960, formalized in 1982, enforced through systematic information, suppression. They'd known each other for 60 years, and they'd let it continue, let people vanish, let families grieve without answers. Marcus Webb was 28 years old when something dragged him into that canyon. The thermal footage showed careful transport, measured movement. He'd been selected, and somewhere in a classified file, his disappearance would be marked as within acceptable parameters. But that didn't explain what I'd seen. That integrated individual living with the family group, which meant not everyone was lost. Some were accepted, and some weren't. The question was why. I pulled up the missing persons data again. 23 cases over 49 years. If the creatures were attempting to integrate all of them, why was the recovery rate 0? Then I saw it. 19 of 23 disappearances occurred between November and March. Winter, deep winter, when food is scarce, when survival demands maximum efficiency. Adopting a human during winter is high risk. Additional mouth to feed, no survival skills adapted to that environment. The creatures would face a choice: invest resources when resources are limited, or cut losses. I searched for any remains recovered near the canyon. Found 2 cases. February 1991. Partial skeletal remains, male, 30s. What ended his life was hypothermia and malnutrition. December 2003. Skeletal remains, same profile. They weren't harmed, they were released. Failed to integrate, so they were turned back out. Without gear, without supplies. Exposure was inevitable. Not violence, but not mercy. Natural selection applied to recruitment. Marcus Webb was taken February 14th. Peak winter. If the pattern held, he had weeks to prove himself. Learn their ways, accept integration. If he couldn't adapt, if he refused, they'd release him. And winter would finish what they'd started. Spring thaw was 3 weeks away when I put it together. I gave the coordinates to Marcus's family through an encrypted message board and told them to hire a private recovery team. And they did. April 29th, 2024. 2.4 miles from the canyon settlement, sheltered under a rock overhang. What do you think happened to Marcus Webb? Was he integrated into that family group, or did something else happen? Drop your theories in the comments. I met with Jake one more time after Marcus's remains were recovered. Remote location, full counter-surveillance protocols. He'd been grounded for 3 months, but he'd kept the original thermal footage, and we reviewed it using military-grade analysis software. Standard playback showed what I'd already seen, but frame-by-frame analysis revealed details that changed everything. The creature's movement pattern showed deliberate care. Every 40 seconds, it adjusted its grip on Marcus's body. Systematic adjustment to prevent circulation loss. Someone who'd done this before. Every 200 yards, it paused. And you could see Marcus's chest on thermal, rising and falling, breathing, still alive. The creature was monitoring him. It wasn't dragging prey. It was carefully transporting a candidate toward evaluation. Then Jake showed me a frame of 847. A second heat signature appears, smaller, walking parallel 30 yards west. Juvenile, following the procedure, watching the adult work, learning. Timestamp, 6:47 a.m., February 14th. Marcus was reported missing at 2300 hours, February 13th. The creature had been transporting him for at least 7.5 hours, still moving carefully at dawn. I reported this at 7:02, Jake said. Federal agents rolled into the airfield at 9:15, 2 hours and 13 minutes, from Portland. They were already mobilized, already had protocols. What did they tell you? He looked at me for a long time. That some knowledge protects people by staying classified. And if I valued my family's safety, I'd forget what I saw. The thermal footage proved Marcus was alive at least 8 hours after capture, and the federal response time proved the government had standing protocols for this exact scenario. They'd done this before, many times, and they'd perfected the cover-up. Marcus Webb's body was recovered April 29th, exactly where I predicted. Private team, no federal involvement until after extraction. When they finally released information, it was minimal. What ended his life? Hypothermia. When it happened, late February. No additional details. But the team that found him told me things that never made it into official reports. His body was positioned deliberately under that rock overhang. Not collapsed where he fell. Arranged. Covered with woven pine branches, preserved from scavengers, facing east, cultural burial practice. His clothing was intact but modified, makeshift fiber bindings wrapped around his boots. Animal hide wrapped around his torso. Someone had added layers, crude weatherproofing that required knowledge and effort. His hands were wrapped in moss and bark. Frostbite treatment applied by someone else, someone who understood basic medical intervention. The medical examiner I trust found no trauma, no violence, no restraint injuries. Frostbite was severe. Malnutrition was advanced. Hypothermia was what ended his life. But there was a broken fibula, lower left leg, healed wrong, approximately 3 weeks old, set with crude, splint materials. Someone had treated that fracture. Someone had kept him alive for weeks. Marcus had been alive, mobile with assistance, for weeks after capture, injured but cared for. And then something changed. In his right hand, clutched tight enough that rigor mortis had locked it in place, was paper. Page torn from his own journal. 4 words written in pencil. I couldn't become them. Marcus was captured alive. Leg broken during initial struggle. Taken to the canyon settlement. His injury was treated. He was sheltered, fed, protected, given time to heal, and given a choice. Adapt, learn their ways, accept integration, survive or refuse, maintain his identity as human, and accept the consequences. He refused. whether from psychological inability or conscious choice, to perish human rather than live as something else. He couldn't cross that threshold. And the creatures made their choice too. They released him, wrapped him in improvised weatherproofing, sent him away. They didn't harm him. They let him go. And he made it 2.4 miles before his body failed. The government classified everything within a week. Marcus's family signed non-disclosure agreements in exchange for compensation. The official report listed accidental loss from exposure. Case closed. But those 4 words stay with me. I couldn't become them. Dignity preserved at the cost of survival. And the creatures who gave him that choice showed more humanity than the government that's been covering this up for 60 years. Marcus Webb's case wasn't isolated. The pattern continues. I've been monitoring missing persons reports, and the numbers haven't changed. October 15th, solo male hiker, 32, vanished in Mount Jefferson area. Federal presence arrived within 36 hours. Official conclusion, presumed lost to exposure. November 3rd, another disappearance. Male, 28. Same abbreviated search, same federal coordination. 2 new cases in 8 months. 25 total in 50 years. The recruitment continues, and the government continues managing it. Monitor, contain, suppress, repeat. I made one more covert trip to the canyon rim in late October. Different access point, full stealth protocol. Just observing from a distance. The settlement was still occupied. Heat signatures confirmed 6 to 8 individuals. New construction had been completed. Expanded shelter on the eastern cliff face. Possibly for someone new. I watched the possession cache from 700 yards out. 3 times over 72 hours, I saw figures approach it, remove items, rearrange others. The cache was active, being maintained, and I saw them training the young. 2 juveniles and 1 adult, practicing movement drills, learning to move silently, identifying signs, not just survival skills, recruitment skills, teaching the next generation how to select candidates, how to track them, how to bring them home. This isn't stopping. They're actively sustaining their population through calculated integration of human beings, and the federal government has no intention of intervening. I tried sharing this evidence, posted footage to multiple platforms, sent documentation to journalists. Every upload was removed within hours. Every journalist stopped returning messages. One researcher disappeared from social media entirely. The suppression isn't casual, it's systematic. Automated screening flags keywords, video characteristics. Human reviewers escalate to federal oversight, and then it disappears. If this footage disappears, you'll know why. Save it, share it, because this is the truth they don't want you to see. I've spent 6 months researching the legal framework that makes this possible. The Wilderness Act of 1964 established federal authority, creating a legal framework for ecological restoration areas. Standard conservation legislation, except it included classified annexes, attachments never publicly released. I filed Freedom of Information Act requests. Most came back fully redacted, but one, Annex 7B, came back with partial declassification. The language is bureaucratic. It never says Bigfoot, just uncontacted populations and biologically significant entities requiring territorial preservation. Like they're talking about remote tribes. Except these populations weren't human, and the government had been protecting them, managing them, controlling information for generations. I found references to a 1967 Department of Interior memo, still classified, but the footnotes revealed enough. Subject line, Management Protocols for Uncontacted Populations in Federal Territories. Someone had officially acknowledged what lived in those mountains, and then decided the public didn't need to know. I cross-referenced protected ecological zones nationwide, found at least 16 other areas matching the same characteristics: remote locations, restricted access, and the same impossible disappearance rates. 17 zones across the American West, maybe more. 17 territories where the same thing is happening, where people vanish at rates that defy explanation. We were never told we were sharing this land. Those agreements were made without our knowledge, that some of us would be considered acceptable losses. Marcus Webb was 28 years old. He had a family who loved him, and somewhere in a classified file, his disappearance was marked as within acceptable range for maintaining the territorial agreement. That's the truth they've kept from us for 3 generations. 17 protected zones, hundreds of disappearances over 60 years, and a federal bureaucracy that's decided our right to know is less important than managing the secret. I'm still here, still in these mountains, still watching that canyon, because someone needs to document what's happening. And the next time you hear about a missing hiker in federal wilderness, the next time search and rescue gets called off early, the next time federal agents arrive too fast, you'll know what questions to ask. You'll know what they're protecting: us, the truth, the accountability they've avoided for 60 years. I've lived in these mountains for 50 years. I've survived blizzards and rock slides and every kind of danger. But nothing prepared me for what I found in that canyon, for the intelligence I encountered, for the government conspiracy I uncovered. They're real. They're here. They've been here longer than we have. And we made a deal with them that we were never told about, a deal that costs lives, costs truth. Marcus Webb didn't perish from the accident. He was lost by choice, from refusal to become something he couldn't accept. And the government that should have rescued him instead protected the secret. Share this before it disappears, before the algorithms flag it and the classification authority buries it. Because this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a documented fact, evidence. And the more people who know, the harder it becomes for them to keep hiding the truth. I'm Dave Mitchell, and I'll be here in these mountains, watching, documenting, waiting for the next disappearance that proves everything I've told you. Subscribe if you want to follow this investigation deeper. Comment your theories below. What do you think these creatures really want with us? Because what I've shown you is just the beginning. There are 16 more zones, 16 more canyons where the same thing is happening, and I'm going to find them all. I'm going to tell every story the government wants buried, because Marcus Webb deserves that much, and so do the 24 others whose belongings sit in that cache. The truth is out there in those mountains, and I'm not stopping until everyone knows it.